We're good.
All right. I am StarChild. I use they, them pronouns. I am a queer autistic human. And I'm here with Shockie G. We're representing the OutLoud podcast with The Word is Right. And we are a podcast that formed around the OutLoud LGBTQ literary art anthology that was published by The Word is Right, or Red and Green Books. And you can get that by checking out the Red and Green Books website, figuring out where to order.
Greenbooks.com, that's READ, or greenbooks.com, or you can reach out to any of the contributors for a book.
Yeah, excellent. So we're going to talk about neurodiversity in the queer community. There's a lot of overlap that I found as a neurodiverse person in the queer community. And it's interesting because it kind of like, I noticed that particularly like in the trans and non-binary community, there tends to be a higher concentration of neurodivergent folks. And just to name the terminology I'm using, neurodivergent is kind of an umbrella term, and it can be applied to autism, ADHD, bipolar, borderline personality disorder, other personality disorders, basically. And pretty much it's kind of a self-identified kind of thing, but people that because of their neurology and their mental health are just vibing in a different way than the sort of standard, I guess, neurotype that's referred to as neurotypical. And so it's really an interesting thing to navigate being neurodivergent in an already marginalized community. And I think one of the things about it that I notice as a neurodivergent person is a lot of times the things that I'm not necessarily synced in with other people about, or with neurotypical people about, in terms of social conventions and patterns of communication. A lot of times neurodivergence can just look like rudeness, or irresponsibility. Yeah, cool. So should we do a intro again, or?
No, it's okay.
All right, hey, that's cool. We're just rolling here. I'm StarChild, they, them, with Shockie G. We're here on the OutLoud podcast with The Word is Right, and we're talking about neurodivergence, and we have an anthology of amazing poems from amazing poets, amazing queer poets from all over the place. And it's available from Red or Green Books. So check out the anthology. But yeah, we're just talking here about neurodivergence and the way that in the queer community, there's kind of a subset of people who are also neurodivergent, and neurodivergent being defined as autism or ADHD or bipolar or borderline personality or schizophrenia or any kind of mental health disorder or way of perceiving reality that causes people to have some friction with neurotypical social norms. And I think one of the things that's challenging is figuring out when you're dealing with those kinds of dynamics for neurodivergent people, like just where responsibility lies, in social interactions. And so I guess just to like stop me talking, I want to pivot over to Shockie, and if you have just any comments in response to like some of the stuff I've been saying, or if you can think of if you think of like any situations that you've encountered where there was like a neurotype difference that was interpreted as, oh, this person's being rude, they're being irresponsible, or they're a loose cannon, they're too much, that kind of thing. We could talk about whatever you want to, however you want to respond.
Yeah, I mean, I guess like your definition of the neuro divergent, I didn't know that it just included like all those different range of mental illness. But I do know, I don't know a lot about neurodivergence, but I did watch some things on the build up to this video. And it was one thing I noticed was the disparity based on the studies done around it. So recently they've noticed that more people of color are being diagnosed as neurodivergent, and a lot of those being LGBTQ as well.
Right.
So any marginalized group being listed as neurodivergent. And the reason for that is the original studying and testing was originally done on just straight white males, right?
Yeah.
So that's what neurotypical is. So anytime you go outside the culture of that you're going to become divergent,
right?
Become an issue with people trying to self-diagnose themselves because they don't necessarily fit that guideline. So I think there's a lot of studies that need to be done in regards to a lot of those things. But I thought that was something interesting that I found.
Yeah, I think that's such an important thing to name that, oftentimes when we're talking about social norms, what we're talking about within Western culture is norms that have been shaped by basically cis white men, cis straight white men. And so already with any kind of queerness, there's a deviation there. And I think that, you brought up just the disparity between how, I'm going to name it this way, there's a big difference between how white neurodivergent people are perceived and how neurodivergent people of color are perceived. And specifically what a diagnostic difference that I've encountered in kids is that white boys get diagnosed with ADHD, whereas Black kids get diagnosed with oppositional defiance disorder. For pretty much the same kinds of behaviors where you're in a classroom, you're having trouble, staying in your seat, following instructions, stuff like that. But when you perceive it as this problem with authority, then you slap on the oppositional defiance label, and it's like, oh, he's just a goofy clown. Then that's the kid who gets to be ADHD. And there's a difference in how accommodations happen for ADHD versus oppositional defiance. And so there's a lot of these little areas where there's disparity between white folks and people of color. But yeah, Robert, you got something?
Yeah, I'm curious whether either any of the participants in the room know why the LGBT community has linked to the binary community. And I will share my understanding of why the lesbian and gay community in the 1990s linked to the trans community. In the 1990s, gay and lesbians were very much focused on getting civil rights.
Right.
And in the trans community, a lot of them were associated with the National Association of Women that were very accepting of trans people and thought gender identity was more important than sexual orientation. So one of the reasons why the Human Rights Campaign and the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force joined with trans people is to try to get the power of women through the National Association of Women.
Okay.
So I'm wondering why we're now joining with binary people. What's the motivation for doing that? Is it political? Is it something else?
Tell me more about what you're referring to there with joining with binary people. So binary people meaning like cisgender folks, like that are like identify as specifically male, specifically female.
Right. So for example, I live in Delaware and my local community center is called Camp Rehoboth. And I've done training for them.
Okay.
20 years ago, it was giving people an orientation to what LGBT was.
Right.
Now there's like 5 other letters associated with that. And one of them is non-binary.
Oh, okay, non-binary, right.
Q. Yeah, one of them is Q. And I'm wondering why we have joined with non-binary people. I don't know, I don't understand it.
Okay. Well, I mean, one thing that as a non-binary person, I'm also bi or pansexual, and so like, it's kind of like within my body, I have both pieces of that. And I think that I guess the way that I kind of understand it is, and this speaks, kind of trying to tie it back to neurodivergence. For me, there's not a line in where my queerness ends, my neurodiversity begins, or where my even where my bisexuality ends and my non-binariness begins. It's I don't experience sort of like compartmentalized distinctions between sexuality and gender in my life, because part of what I enjoy as a non-binary person, with some romantic attraction to men is being I don't even know if I'm saying it the right way, but like the role of receiving affection, as opposed to like having having like a gay man compliment me on my appearance or something like that. That's part of, and I associate that with, at least within my framework, part of my feminine side. So I kind of see it as like a coalition of people who, for a variety of different reasons, are outside of social norms, especially within the queer community, of course, around gender and sexuality, and it's like the advocacy. It's and now we're dealing with in our country, the anti-trans push is, that's where the a lot of the energy is among the queerphobic folks, and so so it's about a lot of it right now is about enforcing gender norms, because yes, there's always still a threat to Obergefell, and gay marriage and stuff, but like they're actively pushing anti-trans legislation, like trying to say that every time that someone dresses in drag, they're a sex worker or something like that. That was the logic. And one of the I think a Republican in Oklahoma or something was saying that that it's like they want to treat any club that has drag shows, like code it the same way that they treat a strip club, which is wow. It's like, and I feel like drag in and of itself is a really interesting phenomenon that, and I see it as being part of the way that I do it it's kind of a neurodivergent thing, because I'm not trying to look like a woman. I'm conveying, when I wear, makeup and dress up and wear a wig and all that kind of stuff. I'm doing it as a genderqueer neurodivergent person who has sort of an awkward, weird way of, expressing, what I consider to be my omnigender kind of status, where I'm, exuding masculine features and feminine features at the same time. Yeah, so I don't know, like I said a lot of things, but Shockie, do you have any comments about Robert's question?
I really think, I don't know if it may be the community themselves, but I think it's more other people lumping anything that is away from the norm into that group. Because you even see like intersex people are, part of it now as well, intersex, non-binary, trans, so it's more than just sexual identity, which it may just be, strength in numbers. The more people that you have backing you, at the end of the day, if everyone's fighting for the same common goal, why not? But getting back to the neurodivergence, I think it's the same sort of thing, where a lot of people are being grouped into neurodivergence because they don't meet one standard. So, if you're not meeting one standard when it comes to gender or sexuality, you're also being lumped into the LGBTQIA community as well.
Yeah, I just remember in middle school, it's like, it kind of, I really wish I could go back to my middle school cafeteria and try to figure out how many of the kids who were just sitting at tables by themselves, like me, or, with the nerdy kids, were either neurodivergent or queer or both. And I have a feeling that those of us who were kind of social outsiders, in early adolescence, that the percentage would be quite high. And I kind of like, sometimes I kind of think of neurodivergence nerdiness and neurodivergence are sort of, overlapping in my mind. I mean, I don't think they're necessarily equivalent. I do want to notice, Teresa has shared some wonderful graphs here, and I wonder if there is a way to put them up on our main screen. Teresa R has shared some great things, resources in the chat. Sweet, and Shockie's going to do that.
And Teresa, do you want to share on them?
Sorry, I couldn't figure out how to unmute myself. I'm having problems lately. I just, I noticed on this one graph, especially this one, that some of the areas of the brain that are affected by these things are probably similar.
Yep.
Hence the color coding. So it was interesting for me to look at that, because some of the things there I am neurodivergent. I have some of these things going on. And my husband does too. So, and the different areas of the brain that are affected. And he has more than one thing. So do I. We have multiple things going on. So it was just interesting to see what area of the brain is. I actually want to see the brain and what area of the brain is actually affected, where it's located actually is what I want to see more of. So I'm still doing some research while you guys are talking.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
I would assume, I'm gonna be wrong because I'm not a neurologist, but probably looking at the hypothalamus first. But going back to, because I'm looking at this list, and like you said, I do have a few of these, and you asked me earlier, did I think I had any neurodivergence, and I said I don't think so, but I do have a lot of these that are on this wheel. And going back to what you said earlier about responsibility. And it's something that's come up a lot recently for me. because I'm someone, everyone lately has been using the word like trigger a lot.
Okay. Yeah.
And so when it comes to responsibility, the question is, who's responsible for your triggers, right? Like,
Right.
you're responsible to, if you've been triggered, or to let people know that something's triggering, move, or are other people responsible to basically shelter their conversation for you so that you're not triggered, right? And I think that's a strong concept that I haven't really found the answer to. I personally may say that it's up to that person to control their triggers, but that could also be very, can't think of the word I'm looking for, like kind of push offish, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's such a great question, and an important thing to wrestle with. I think that um, my general answer as an autistic person is that I really feel safe in communities where direct communication is normalized. And there's not the implication that if you have to say something directly to someone, then they have violated a social role. And they've put you in this, position of, having to do something quote unquote rude. Um, and and so I think it's the more that we have communities where people are expressing their needs, and we understand things not in terms of, well, that was an obvious social rule that you just broke and everyone knows it, and you're clearly ignorant or something like that, but more that people say up front. And I think that it is valid, I think, to normalize if someone has specific triggers or things that that impact them in a specific way, to disclose that, as part of, and I think perhaps like the responsibility of the group, of a facilitator or leader within a group, is to create space for people to share if there are things they want other people to know about, in terms of what can be upsetting to them or triggering to them. Then having space for that to be disclosed, and also understanding that some people might still not feel safe opening up about that. And then just being cognizant when we're in an emotionally intense, exchange, of conversation or something like that, and somebody goes into what I would call a trauma response, which is when people are in fight, flight, freeze, or fawn mode. Their anxiety's jacked up, and they're triggered. To be for people who are in a leadership role, to notice those kinds of things, and notice that dynamic, and to have direct communication about it. Hey, it's and it's really hard to do this without like stepping on somebody's foot, but um I guess what you have to do is you kind of don't call it out directly unless you have to, but just kind of noticing, okay, let's everyone just take a pause and take a deep breath, and kind of doing things like that to sort of calm the situation down, but not seeing it as, oh, well, so-and-so is just a bitch, and they're always like getting mad, at stupid things and whatever. No. All of us have different trauma histories. We have different things that people can do without intending any harm, that that can take us to a pretty defensive, kind of aggressive place, in how we respond. And so part of being neurodivergent friendly is being trauma informed, in terms of knowing what a trauma response looks like, and being able to address it as a mental health problem rather than like a moral character issue. Brian, you have your hand up.
Yes, so I have scheduled an appointment that took me over a year to get. to be tested for neurodivergence.
Okay.
And then as a child, I was diagnosed with several learning and motor disabilities. Just was on one of those charts, and I think dyspraxia might have been also, which are two of the things that I had, and there's a whole bunch of other stuff that I remember and things that I do remember, but it's sort of a mixed game because you can't really be re-diagnosed for things as adults because you learn to cope with them. That's number one.
Right.
You know, and also to get insurance won't pay for getting tested for learning disabilities as much as they will for motor issues, but still it's a hard thing to one thing that I could test me for anything told me that the likelihood of me getting things accepted by insurance, certain things, but certain things should be. But also, so I was on Ritalin from probably, I don't know when I started taking Ritalin, second or third grade probably. And so during the day, a teacher would give me a pill. I would take the pill. And I really believe, and this was all the way through like 8th grade probably, I really believe that when you have that happen in a school, the teachers, even if you get all A's, even if you're doing really well, and especially like me, who I was a very good writer, they don't give you the encouragement or they don't pay as much attention to you because you are labeled with this thing. And I honestly don't really believe that when kids get diagnosed with ADD, they're not, most kids have a combination of several things that aren't ADD. So they're being given this, they're given medication that they don't really, that their body will not react to properly. When I was in the 6th grade, I had a seizure in the middle of the day at school. And actually we were doing a radio play over the intercom system when I had my seizure. So it was a really big deal at the time. And so a coach came and had to pull my tongue out of my mouth. It was, then an ambulance came and they actually took me to my doctor's office rather than the hospital. But I was gone for probably 3 or 4 days. And of course, there were certain people that for at least a year or two, kept on, would bully me with, you better watch out, he might spaz out again and blah, blah, the kind of thing. But I honestly don't really believe in that I was fully had ADD, although I probably had a lot of problems associated with it. And also, so when a while back when I was in my early 30s, I went to an adult ADD specialist who diagnosed me with adult ADD. And he also sent me to a really bad shrink. And I put on Luvox, another depression med, and 2 adult ADD meds. And so what happened is, after the 6th grade, after the thing in the 6th grade, I had a neurologist that I saw. And I was put on Dilantin, which is what they put kids who have ADD on when they have a seizure. But you get labeled as epileptic. But I wasn't really epileptic. So what happened was after I was put on these medications, I had moved back from New York to Mobile. And at this time, I was working a full-time job and I went back to school and learning to learn carpentry. And I was having migraines and anxiety attacks, which I didn't even know everything that was going on. Of course, migraines, they give you migraine medication, which for me would wipe me out. So I had to decide whether or not to take it at certain times because I would have to sleep after I took it. But anyways, and so at one point my mother came by to where I lived to have a conversation with me. And she said, and I think I might've been napping at the time or something. And she said that the next day she called me and asked me what kind of drugs I was on, if I was doing, she thought, I was on some kind of illegal drugs or whatever. I said, no, I didn't even remember her coming by, so I had blacked out. And it was likely that there were more than one time that I blacked out, but I just didn't know. But so she was able to get me an appointment with the neurologist who had moved away from Mobile, but then came back to Mobile, but she was his travel agent. So he took me, even though he wasn't taking new patients, and he told me to bring the medications I was taking. He said, these medications, to take them together is really, really dangerous.
Ooh. Oh my
Yeah, and I had to be weaned off the medications. He
Wow.
decided I was misdiagnosed with adult ADD, and he told me that if we ever sued the guy for malpractice, that he would testify for us, which we didn't do. I mean, my
Right.
life was such a mess, anyways. To go through something like that would have been crazy, and that was my decision. But
Yeah.
it's when you, and I think that that destined me to have migraines for the rest of my life until recently when I started taking blood thinners, which took away the migraines. So, but there's all these things that people get misdiagnosed for because they have that they don't get diagnosed for, and it's this crazy circular thing. And I really want to, when I look at the neurodivergence, I can't look at it in a way of autism, but I do have certain social things that I have problems with, and and when you look at all the things included in all of Sherry's charts, there's quite a few things that have been part of my life for years and years and years, and it's scary. It's a very scary thing to try to figure yourself out, and also try to avoid as much medication as possible. I'm on a lot of medications because I was attacked by a viral infection in the lungs a few years ago, and it's a matter of taking the dosages down to the law. And I've told my doctor I won't go on a new medication unless we remove a medication. I just won't put another chemical in. And it's really hard. And I have to, if I have to take a supplement, I have to ask my doctor because I'm so afraid of it interfering with any medication I take. But yeah, a lot of shit happens, and if we and also when we want to find out something new, I can't really tell my family, because then that's another thing on their list to walk on eggshells around me. Or say you're just being dramatic, suck it up, blah blah blah, that type of thing. That's what my older brother would say.
Yeah, that's what they always tell us. You're just being dramatic. Yeah,
but
what I really want to.
I would say my oldest brother has really become the drama queen of our family. Which is kind of funny.
A whole can?
Yeah.
A whole can.
Yeah.
But so good. So many thoughts there, and I think one of the things that I want to name is that part of what's really complicated about this and about all these diagnoses that are, I'm a mental health professional. I'm a resident, a licensed professional counselor resident. So I'm not fully licensed yet, but I'm in the process and about to get that license like in the next few months. And I mean, I think that any honest clinician is going to be open about the fact that diagnoses are imperfect. They just have to be, because the way that they're written is, exhibits 5 of the following 12 symptoms on a semi-regular basis, that kind of thing, that kind of language. So, the difference between, I have an ADHD diagnosis. I self-diagnosed with autism because my sons are both autistic, and I think that's a more salient category for understanding my behavior. I have a bipolar diagnosis too, but in my experience, I experienced the mood swings in association with masking, and that's an aspect of neurodivergence. When neurodivergent people try to accommodate neurotypical social environments where we, just get hypervigilant about monitoring our own behavior, that phenomenon is referred to as masking, particularly in the autistic community. And actually, I wanted to show off a book that I just finished called Unmasking Autism. And one of the things about this book that's really helpful is it's written as a way of helping people who maybe don't think of themselves as being autistic and don't necessarily want to pay $1,000 or $2,000 to get a medical professional to ask them a bunch of questions that they know how to answer in a neurotypical way because they've been adjusting their behavior their entire lives. Like, instead of to recognize that there are a lot of people who instead of being openly, you know, neurodivergent and just weird and as weird as they feel like being, are living with a lot of anxiety and a lot of stress in their bodies because they're so cautious in how they like interact with people. And that's kind of the concept of masking. And so, you know, if you're interested and curious about whether it's like specifically autism or any kind of neurodivergence, whether you've been masking, you know, for neurotypical people, this is a great resource. It's called Unmasking Autism by Devin Price. And I really just gained a whole lot from reading it. Yeah, so let me pivot first to Shockie to see if you have any comments, and then I'm going to get your question, Robert.
I didn't have any comments. I was laughing when Brian was speaking because the medication, and I just want to say, since you know this does go on Spotify and things like that, I'm not against medication. If you have been diagnosed and should be taking medication, please continue to take your medication. But I was laughing at Brian's situation because I recently had the same situation. About 2 weeks ago, my doctor, I had mentioned that I wanted to start taking an antidepressant, and she just sent it to me. And the pharmacy was like, "You can't take this. Like your other medications will interact with it." So she was like, "Well, stop taking it so you could take the antidepressant." And I did that, and then I got real sick. I didn't know why, and I called her, and she was like, "Oh, you're not supposed to stop the other medication. You're going to go into withdrawal. So you basically have to go through withdrawal for a few days, and then you'll be okay." Which, if you've never been in that situation, that fucking sucks. So, yeah, I totally understand, and especially with these type of disorders, they switch you on and off the medications a lot because they're not sure if it's going to work. It normally takes like a month before it even starts to work, so they're not even sure, and you just have to keep trying to see which one works with you. So I definitely understand that struggle. But yeah, that's all I was going to say. Robert, if you had what you're going to say.
When I was looking at the neurodiversity wheel, all I saw was diagnoses and mental illness. And that's consistent with my understanding of the field of mental health until about 2000. It was totally focused on mental illness. And in 2002, Seligman published a book called Authentic Happiness. Seligman did some very important research on depression. And he said, let's try to research mental health, happiness, as opposed to depression. And you know, when I look at that wheel, I don't see anything. That the two things which I would have liked to have seen on the wheel are creativity, which is associated with divergent thinking, and resilience. But so the wheel looks like mental illness 2000 or earlier.
Yeah. Thank you. That's such an important point because in part of so neurodivergence, as I understand it, and this particularly is a big point in the book, Unmasking Autism, is that it's really a lot of the movement within, cool. And we're looking at a graph now that has, you know, some of the more positive qualities that, you know, that are associated with some of these different diagnoses. And so part of how I understand neurodivergence is people who, one way I put it is people who have an allergy to inauthenticity. You know, I mean, that's the way that, I don't know, like, and when I'm trying to say that, you know, and I guess that's a little bit neurodivergent supremacist or something like that, but there's a sense that, you know, I mean, one of the basic things that I struggle with as an autistic person is if everyone's doing something one way, and I know that they're just doing it that one way because everyone else is, I will do it a different way. Like I'm just like wired in such a way that if there is an opportunity to rebel, you know, and break a rule, then I will do it. Not now, if it doesn't cause harm. I mean, if we're talking about, you know, just kind of conventions and, you know, even, I mean, and sometimes it's kind of pathological. Like, there was a really popular ethics professor at Duke University who's famous, has written all these books in the divinity school, and everyone wanted to be in his class. And I was like, I'm not going to take a class with him because everybody else wants to be in his class, you know. And I kind of I'm probably missed out on an opportunity there, but I, you know, I feel like there's a lot more to neurodivergence and the idea of divergence in general, you know, being contrarian, you know, not quote unquote playing nice and just playing along and just, you know, laying low and doing what everybody else is doing, but you know, doing your own thing. And so, you know, and so that's a different way of framing it without the sense that it's about diagnoses and pathologies. I think it's really important that, because part of the argument in this book, I'm Asking Autism, is, you know, what happens if we rewire the world and the way that social conventions happen in such a way that neurodivergent people aren't expending all of this anxiety and stress trying to conform to ways of acting, ways of moving their bodies, you know, holding back and just sort of sitting stiffly, like, you know, you're supposed to in your, you know, uncomfortable wooden desk, you know, that's always facing forward. What if instead of, you know, like how much more healthy would everyone be if we lived in a world where the way that we structure social interactions is intentionally inclusive of people who don't pick up on, you know, subtle social cues, and who, you know, naturally have challenges for a variety of reasons with just conforming and complying, you know, to whatever's being like laid down as like the rules.
And that goes back into my thing with what considers someone neurodivergent, right? Because a lot of it, for example, kids that are being, we had spoke earlier about kids who are being put on medication at young ages for like ADHD or oppositional defiance disorder. And the question is it that they're divergent or ill, or is it the fact that we're forcing kids to sit at a desk all day and sit still for 8 hours, right? Is it that people are having issues with anxiety, or that we're putting them in situations where they don't have a release and they're not able to not be stressed out and not, you know, their body's always producing that adrenaline to get through their everyday situations, that now they have this divergence, right?
Exactly. Yeah, that's such an important point, you know. And a lot of things that neurodivergent people deal with, because I'm hearing two things in that. One is that there's a lot of kids who, if they were given enough recess, enough unstructured, you know, body movement time, then they would be able to cope with their anxiety, their fidgetiness a lot better. And people who are getting, you know, sent to the pill mill to, you know, get their, you know, Ritalin or whatever, you know, there have definitely been studies, you know, I don't have it like at the tip of my fingers, the actual, you know, statistics, but increasing recess time decreases the level of Ritalin prescription for elementary age children.
Yeah, even little things like removing red 40 from their diet.
Yeah.
Like it's just little things
Right.
that fix those things, and it makes me feel like, is it really an illness or is it just a symptom of our society?
Yeah. Oh,
But
okay.
but let's get Brian and Robert have their hand up. So Brian, what's going on?
Unmuted. I wanted to ask StarChild about a specific thing.
Cool.
Well, first I'll just say that I never knew what my learning and motor disabilities exactly were until I was in college. So
Mhm.
when I was in high school was when they were first allowing people to take the SATs and ACTs untimed. And the teachers that did the proctoring on Saturdays refused to give extra time to the kids with learning disabilities. So basically we had to pay learning disability tutors to individually monitor us in the library when we took the test. So we weren't allowed to take the test with the other students. What a wonderful thing to set kids apart. I don't think I saw it that way necessarily, but I really hated the fact that I had to do it by myself. But the other thing was they wouldn't allow more than one kid to be proctored. They had to each individually do it. But also the teachers wouldn't say, yes, I'll take money to give them extra time, because it was new to let kids take time. So in the middle of college, there's standardized tests that you take in the middle of your college career. And I was able to get the things on time, but I had to find out what all my learning disabilities were. And when I got my files, and this woman explained to me, the woman from the organization that I got the files from explained it to me. I said, why was I never explained this stuff when I was a kid or anything like that? And nowadays, kids, when they have learning disabilities from the beginning, they're explained everything. They're explained everything along the way. But they said, we just didn't do it that way in your day.
Oh yeah, it was terrible.
Yeah, but anyways, so
tooth and nail for that.
And actually now I have no access to any childhood records because all my doctors have basically died, and the organization, didn't put everything onto computers till probably like 1990 or 2000 or something. So, but it's, you have telling kids what's going on. Kids are so much smarter than we give them credit for. And
oh yeah,
I just, it's hard for me as an adult. There are certain jobs that I do really well at that I can't keep because I can't work as fast as other people because of motor skills, which I actually do better than other people because I have a greater attention to detail. But I want to ask you about, what is dyspraxia? Is that the same as dyspraxia, or is that just another way to say it? I always thought it was like something to do with the muscles in my hand, but I'm not really sure.
Yes, that's how I understand it. So dyscalculia is like math, not dealing with numbers. Dyslexia is reading. Dysgraphia is writing, and I think dyspraxia has to do with like just fine motor skills.
So I had dysgraphia and dyspraxia, and I noticed that it was talking about verbal things. There are things that I have to literally have verbally explained to me. I can't. When people want to have texting conversations with me that require more than yes, no, or that are intensive, I have to say, please, let's talk on the phone because I'm more verbal. Yeah. And a lot of people.
Oh, I'm so relate to that.
And so many people aren't willing to have phone conversations anymore. Even people my age. I'm 56. I mean, it seems like there should be an age limit in which you say, I'd rather have a phone conversation than a text conversation. It's just like men wearing baseball hats backward. After you're 30, it should be a good
I'm gonna do both. You're gonna text me and I'm wearing my hat backwards.
But that's okay. That's okay because you're Shockie and you're cool and you can do anything you want. But plus I have a special place in my heart for you. So
and Shockie, just checking in really quick on the time. Are we good to just keep rolling as the conversation leads, or can we flow a little bit?
If you want. I mean, you guys had said you wanted to make it an hour, so if you want to do it, just to get everything in, that's okay.
Yeah, if we could just keep rolling, because I love the conversation. Gosh, wow. I'm like so bewildered. There's so many things to respond to. So I'm gonna just pass it to Robert, who has his hand up, and I'll try to figure out some way to respond to it.
In the 1980s, I was studying to be a mental health counselor, but I didn't pursue that as a career.
Mm-hmm.
As early as the 1980s, there was a lot of very good research to show that attention deficit was due to understimulation,
Right.
and there was a strong biological component to that.
Yep.
And the child's hyperactivity was the attempt to stimulate themselves.
Right.
So any solutions, changing a diet or changing recess has to go back to that fundamental finding about ADHD and hyperactivity.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I don't want it to be taken that I don't believe it's a diagnosis. There are people who have any of the illnesses on there that are legitimate. I just noticed that with some kids, I think it is a wrong diagnosis, if you will.
Yeah.
But there are people who do have a true diagnosis and need for medication.
Yeah, and I feel like, and that's the thing is that so in my psychotherapy practice, I'm really focused on somatic therapy, which is working with the body, both to release trauma, but also strategizing with neurodivergent people, because I have a lot of neurodivergent clients, about what do you need, what does your body need to have happen so that you can feel grounded and safe, And so, yeah, basically, that's spot on, Robert, about like the understimulation, because like we live in a culture that is increasingly cerebral and disembodied. And there's this kind of elitism around that, this idea that the more, intellectual you are, the more you deal just with ideas and not with physical things, like blue collar work is lesser than, white collar work, etc. There's this idea that we're supposed to be just brains without bodies. And the body is this like giant inconvenience that you try to regulate and into submission. And that's me talking with my evangelical Christian upbringing, trying really hard, like not to masturbate when I was a teenager and all that kind of shit. But like basically, yeah, I mean, the way that I structure my life now as a neurodivergent person is I do things with my body to deal with the need, not just to be stimulated, but also to calm down if I'm overstimulated, because I can be under or over. And there are specific things. So like, for example, I go swimming in the lake in my neighborhood during the winter because it's cold, and cold water immersion is a way that I found for releasing anxiety. I also use a breathing exercise by a man named Wim Hof, which is amazing, and he's also a proponent of cold water immersion, and so that's kind of his program is breath work and jump in the lake or take cold showers. And then I like to walk barefoot outdoors, even, in the woods where there are pine cones and all that, because like the more that your feet get stimulation from the earth, the more that the more that your body calms down. Because like we're living in these bodies that were designed over millions of years, of evolution, most of which we were barefoot and naked in the woods. And it's very, very recent to live in a climate controlled environment with, like white walls around you and fluorescent lights. That's a very new, phenomenon. Yeah. And so like our bodies still need what what they experienced when our ancestors were walking around in the earth. We still need to have temperature fluctuation, to have different tactile surfaces that we're interacting with our hands and with our feet, natural surfaces, like, and it's like, if you notice, like, why can't we walk barefoot? Well, for those of us who live in cities, which are unnatural and which have all this industrial waste and, and hazardous, like, things that can cut into us that would not be found in woods that, don't have, it's called grounding, Teresa. Yes. Yeah. Teresa has made some great comments. There's a lot of good stuff in the chat, some resources. Thanks for sharing those, Teresa. And Shockie.
So the weird thing is, because we were talking about the, society turning to being more intellectual, more cerebral. And I think a push for that, and I could talk about this for days, is that we still don't understand consciousness. And so with trying to understand it, that's where we're thinking it's, brain, this, because if they can control it, they believe that they can put it in a, you can live forever because they can take consciousness and move it from place to place. So that's where the body sort of kind of falls to the wayside, because if you believe that the consciousness is the brain, is your thoughts, then the rest of it kind of, you're still going to pay attention to it, but it kind of falls to the wayside. So I think that's what the change is with us, is trying to lock into that, because if you see a lot of what we do, like you said, somatic healing, more people are turning to things like meditation. Yep. Because, again, it's with the consciousness, it's with the mind. But my question, when you say somatic healing, talking about that, is that, can you explain that more? Is that like sensory play for people with like autism? Is that kind of what you're referring to?
Yeah. I mean, it can be a lot of things, but so for example, I will sometimes have clients who need to release anger, and we sometimes we go walking in the woods. We find a place where we can't disturb anyone, and then they take a stick and they beat the shit out of the ground with it, and let out their feelings about whatever thing has made them so angry, or throw rocks really, really hard, in ways that can't hurt anything. And just having, so it's both exerting yourself physically, if there's a need to release anger, but also having representative actions, so rituals. So like, for example, I had a pond. So I like to go in nature whenever I do therapy, and thankfully my liability, like wherever I go, so it's not like I don't have to be stuck in a terrible office. But we went to a pond, and one of my clients wrote things that she wanted to let go of on leaves, and then she put the leaves in the water, and that was part of her process. And having a representative, see, that's what children do when they're playing on the playground, is they're finding ways to act out. It's not just silliness. It's like actually very constructive processing of their feelings through imaginary situations. And they can create scenarios and games and, imaginary worlds, because it's harder to deal with things directly. When you can turn it into an imaginary artistic kind of activity, then it's easier to deal with difficult feelings and get them out of you. So Robert, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to share two of the researches on the positive qualities on the neuro wheel. The first one had to do with studies about creativity in the 1980s. A psychologist was interested in why Sylvia Plath, who was awarded the Pulitzer Prize for writing, when she was about 30, that within 2 years that she committed suicide. And
Right.
the purpose of the study was to investigate whether giving scientists and artists the highest level awards very early in life, like before 35,
Ooh.
was related to depression. And that was an early creativity study. A typical resilience study was for the mental illnesses which have a proven genetic component, like schizophrenia and alcoholism, that to do parent-child studies where there are multiple children in the family, and to understand why one child would become an alcoholic like their parent, but another child would not, and to follow that family over time. That's the typical resilience study. So I just wanted to share those two things on the wheel.
And you know what's
that.
weird about that Sylvia Plath thing? I think we see that a lot, especially with my generation, because I remember, and I'm pretty sure it's almost everyone in this room. I was younger, like being in gifted classes just because you could read, like, and it was kind of like second grade, like you're supposed to be able to read, you know what I mean? But then you kind of go through that through middle school, high school, and then like by the time I got to college, like I was just so used to like getting accolades for doing the bare minimum that when I got to college and was like, okay, I actually have to study, I actually have to learn this. It took a large hit on my mental health, because it felt like, why am I not succeeding anymore? But the thing is, it's not that I wasn't succeeding. It wasn't that I was doing any better or more than my peers. It was just because of all of that in the beginning. And I think that a lot of our generation, that latchkey generation, kind of had that, where they built you up a lot as a kid.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'm wanting to make sure we don't lose a thread, because in my whatever wild ADHD autistic brain, I remember, Shockie, you saying something about consciousness and how we don't get consciousness, and I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about that, because I think that one of the things that's kind of wild about consciousness is, it's just that it's such a huge mystery. What's going on? What is the thing that's awake, within me, that is like underneath, my experience of myself. And and so for me as a spiritual person, who generally operates with, and you can be spiritual and you don't have to be theistic, you don't have to have like a deity or anything, like you can just be someone who appreciates the way that energy moves between bodies. But part of my journey has been kind of learning to identify. So another aspect of my neurodivergence is that I sort of identify myself as having 7 different parts of my personality. So I don't think it's a standard dissociative identity disorder diagnosis where my parts are unaware of each other, where like I black out into one alter ego or another, in different situations. It's more that I experience emotional shifts between different kind of personas that are in me, or different archetypes that express themselves, that I've kind of grabbed hold of, through my life journey. But what I wanted to say about that in terms of consciousness and the way I understand this spiritually is I believe that, and this is something that's very absent from the white Christian culture in which I grew up, but I hear from, when I talk to Native peoples, Latino peoples, Black folks, I hear a lot more conversation about ancestors. and about this understanding that the people who have passed on before us are still with us, and they're still, you know, part of our consciousness, you know, and I feel like that's a whole other level to this. And one of the things that I have a poem that I want to share in a little bit. One of the kind of claims that I make in the poem about neurodivergent people, who I think in past cultures and basically in non-Western cultures, a lot of times we end up being mystics and shamans and prophets and stuff like that, because we have, I think, and I'm not, you know, this is just intuitive speculation, so it's not based on any kind of, you know, scientific data or anything. But my sense is that we have maybe more of a sensitivity to spirits and ancestors, and you know, I mean, another way of saying it is the dead. You know, that there is consciousness out there that we're part of, that all of us are part of, but that when people are more attuned to energy that isn't just, you know, predictable, scripted, you know, social interaction and kind of paranormal spiritual energy, then that can cause a lot of mental illness because of, you know, getting flooded with, you know, paranormal experiences. And so, yeah, so I'm curious if y'all have any thoughts about that. And unfortunately, I'm actually going to have to step out because I'm having my chronic illness has struck. So I will be back.
So back to the consciousness thing. I don't know if any of you guys listened to KRS-One, but he had done a speech years back in the 90s, and he was talking about consciousness. And I know that about 50% of the population does not have an inner voice. So this was more focused on people who do have that inner voice. But what he was stating was, if I were to say to you right now, say red, right? Without opening your mouth, say red. If you have that inner voice, you can hear yourself say red, but obviously you're not hearing it through your physical ears, right? So how where is that voice coming from? Or just like if you can taste something that you're not eating, or if someone says, picture a red balloon, you can see a red balloon, but you're not seeing a red balloon through your eyes. And he was talking about that on a level of consciousness and trying to understand why it is that way. Like, why do we have this secondary kind of identity that's inside of us? And I thought that was interesting, by any means. Co-host dipped on me. Yeah.
Can I say something? Can I
Yeah,
contribute?
what's up?
Okay.
Yeah, what's up?
So what the articles I was looking at, the last one I posted in there was talking about, well, the first one, the definition of consciousness and where it's located in the brain is more to do with our awakeness or asleepness, with, like, say you go into a coma in the hospital and you come out of the coma, now you're conscious, that kind of conscious, not the general consciousness of the entire world that we're all kind of a part of or contributing to in one way or another. So that's a kind of more abstract concept, right?
Mm-hmm.
So more of a concrete concept is whether we're awake or we're asleep, and whether we can wake up and if we can't. But yeah, I think that's just the way of the world now, with all that is going on that seems to be out of our control. I think we're looking for answers now more than ever. And so when we're reaching out, looking for these answers, we're not afraid now to go maybe dwell in or go into places that we've never really known about before. And largely, not proven areas where maybe it can't be proven, just belief systems and, different, spirituality, if you will, different types of spirituality. So like, I'm right now I'm going to yoga. I'm learning about chakras. I'm learning about different energy sources that are within our bodies, where they're concentrated. If you go and get acupuncture, there's your energy that flows through your entire body. There's points where you can get acupuncture done to unblock energy sources that's within your own body. I'm learning like all about, energies that are flowing through us. And then of course, energies that's all around us, because we're also affected by that. So, for healing purposes, I'm going for these different things that I have going on with myself. And I think it's helping my mind a little too. Like, even though I didn't think I needed to go for that reason, everything that flows through your body, it's connected. It's not like, unless it's blocked somehow,
Yeah.
all of this is connections. So it's all throughout the body. Like what I said before about what part of the brain is affected mostly by ADHD, the whole brain, everywhere. It's not just, okay, this part is affected by this, or my big toe is not affected by the rest of my body. Let me tell you, if I hit my big toe, the rest of my body is going to be affected because I'm going to be in so much freaking pain, right? Everything's going to light up. So it's not like before I thought, well, I'm going to just like say I'm fat in my stomach and I want to just work on my stomach. Just help me get rid of this big, round ball around this tire that I've developed over the course of my life. Let me just get rid of that. No, it can't just get rid of that. You have to work on the whole thing. It's a package deal. So I'm learning that as I'm getting older, I'm learning all these things. Whereas before I may not have even considered such a concept. But it's not true that when you get older you start getting where you lose your mind completely. You get wiser. There is such a thing as getting older and wiser. In this country, we don't respect our elders at all. We think, oh, that senile old biatch, she doesn't know what she's talking about, screw her. She's from ancient history over there. She can't be enlightened. She can't know anything, right? So that's just how the country is. They worship the youth, but, and then, of course, as you get older, you start showing signs of deterioration and it becomes apparent that you're older and you can't really hide that fact anymore. You kind of have ageism going on and you're losing that level of respect. Whereas in Eastern culture, they respect the elders and they treat them with the respect that they deserve because, hey, they made it this far. They must have done something right.
They don't have 70-year-olds passing laws, probably.
Well, I'm not talking about our government, because our government, even though it's filled with old people, I'm not talking about them. Yeah. I'm talking about the general population. Yeah.
I'm completely in agreement with both of y'all, like both of y'all's statements. Yeah.
Because our government is corrupted. I'm not talking about corrupted people.
Absolutely. Robert, you had something. Well, and not to pivot too quickly, Teresa. And I think so. Let me say this to what Teresa's saying before I jump to Robert. I really think that in the predominant Western culture, our disconnection from our ancestors is related to our contempt for old people. I think that this idea that when you have this kind of disembodied, disconnected individualism, where everyone is trying to climb this career ladder and get famous and important, then if you're not in that process of going up that ladder, and in that what is sometimes called the first half of life, like where it's all achievement oriented, then then what use are you? Like if you're retired, then because of our capitalist system measuring people by their productivity, by their, workaholism, that's all part of the same thing as, this, the way that we disrespect our elders and that they don't get to be elders. They just get to be, and I mean, we need to change so much about, I feel like an affinity between neurodivergence and people that are older. that, might have some memory issues, but still have a lot of wisdom to share, like depending on like how old we're talking about. I mean,
Thank you.
my dad has started the thing where he says, I don't know if I told you about this. And I said, Dad, we talked about the last 5 conversations we've had, but he's still a brilliant man. It's just like there are very specific memory issues that start to come into play. And I just see that as another aspect of neurodivergence, like, so if someone has memory issues, you don't have to scold them. You can just say, just gently, yes, yeah, you told me about it. Yep. We don't have to talk about it again. Anyway, so let me pivot to Robert.
Respect for your elders. That's why you do that.
So, StarChild, what you were saying about having a connection to our descendants, that there's one psychologist who did a lot of philosophy about that, Carl Jung's archetypes. And he was a philosopher. He was not a researcher, and nobody followed up on his philosophy and did any research. So everything that he proposed would be considered speculation. But what you said reminded me about Carl Jung.
Yeah, Jung has been a very important influence for me. And there's kind of a Jungian school, and there are people. I mean, research looks a little bit different and part of the challenge with this is when you're talking about research, are you talking about using a proper scientific experimental model, which it gives you a very narrow scope of what you're able to actually do. If you're dealing with any kind of like, metaphysical or deeper consciousness kind of content, it's just not something that's empirical. It's not something that could be measured in a laboratory. So when, the error that science makes is to say, if we can't measure it, it doesn't exist. If we can't put it in a test tube and put some drops of this thing on it that makes it turn purple, then it's not a real thing. And that just leaves out a hell of a lot of, phenomena in the universe.
There is one documentary called The Fifth Dimension, where people have tried to do research on reincarnation, near-death experiences where the person died for like 30 seconds and then was revived, and also on the ability to move objects called telekinesis. But the research that they were able to do was very, very limited. It was interesting to see what they did.
Cool.
Listen, I picked this up. It's funny that you mentioned that. I picked this up. This book was life-changing for me. It was called Proof of Heaven, and it's by a neurosurgeon named Eben Alexander. And what happened to him is he ended up with like, I want to say some form of meningitis, something in the spinal fluid that made him go unconscious, go into a coma, and he was brain dead. They didn't think he was going to make it through. But normally what they say about near-death experiences is that it's like a overproduction of, it's like DMT or maybe some other chemical in the brain, causes you to have dreams and causes you to have near-death experiences. But with him, there was none of that. There was no scientific way for them to explain why he had a near-death experience, because where the severing or whatever happened to him happened, there was no way for that chemical to produce. But he was able to have a near-death experience. He could explain things that happened in the hospital room, even though he was out. He explained things that happened in heaven. I'm not religious, but in the afterlife, things that happen and things that were going to come to happen. And it's just a really awesome read on that. Because after, he was a top brain surgeon before this happened, and now he has this, like, he didn't understand how it could happen because there's no scientific way to explain how it happened. Yep. So it gets into that whole discussion. It's a really awesome read.
Yeah, and I guess like part of what I always wonder about, like my big consciousness question as a spiritual person is like, what if we're already in heaven? You know, like, how would we know, like, if we weren't, you know? Because, you know, and like, what does that even mean? You know, like, I tend to be very, I've moved in a very animistic direction with my spirituality, you know, kind of started out in Christianity. I think I'm still a legitimate Christian, but I think a lot of Christians would say I wasn't, because I call God mother. And, you know, I believe that heaven is being fully present in the moment. So like living a fully present tense life, as opposed to being, you know, imprisoned by your past or terrified of your future. But when you're able to just be fully there, you know, in the moment, and not having your mind racing about all these other things, you know, that's why meditation is just so important and helpful. And I think that's what I tend to, you know, maybe like, I think I just make heaven and nirvana the same thing, you know, like in the Buddhist tradition of like just the stillness, the peace that you can get to at times, and that some people apparently have the ability to just kind of stay there. But why don't I'd like to share a poem that I wrote about neurodivergent people, and just about this whole, you know, some of this kind of spiritual stuff and the concept of, you know, the ancestors and how they speak to us and stuff like that. And so, yeah, so it's called We Used to Be Prophets. And I'm going to try to do it from memory, but I think it's probably a good idea to pull it up on my phone just in case. Because I've slammed with this before, but sometimes I drop. So here we go. We used to be prophets who led the people dancing in the streets with tambourines. We were the ones who anointed the kings. The people trusted us since we spoke to the dead, who were not just voices in our head to get us strapped to a bed and force-fed pills. We were not mentally ill in any other age. We were the sages who wrote your sacred pages before you made them into cages for your God. The people came to us for medicine, when medicine was a conversation with God, a state of meditation, not chemical manipulation, medicated artificially into bodies that remain depressed when disconnected from nature. No matter how much serotonin floods the brain, if we remain in dry-walled rooms, fluorescent lit, our mood won't change a bit. We need more than healthy food to change our mood if every day we sit in front of screens unseen, between the plastic walls of cubicles unsuitable for human use, feeling like refuse inside a machine that doesn't need us but never stops feeding us and making us bleed the way that only 1,000 paper cuts can, because the plan is to keep us from venturing too deep. We're supposed to stay asleep like passengers on an interstellar flight, cryogenically preserved, so we can serve our country for a few decades catatonically, not doing anything too strange or making any changes, because strangeness is dangerous in a market that wants stability and the ability to minimize risk, which is why it's safer to tell prophets that we're bipolar, schizophrenic, or autistic than to let us know we aren't crazy. And the reason we can't sleep is because the dead keep calling us from the deep, where they cannot rest until they are blessed with the knowledge that the cycles of trauma they started have been laid to rest at last, because the past is never done with us. And all our ancestors' sin bubbles over from within until it shoots out of our eyes like magma when we finally lose our shit, if we aren't able to regulate it with enough pills and thrills to make us think we're living the good life and we finally made it. What if nobody ever makes it? What if the point is to stop running the race and accept the grace that says we're allowed to sit on the ground and cry until we feel like laughing and asking God why, screaming and making a scene like it's Halloween? But this is every day in a world that feels so mean to us, until we see the green that rises from the rust of our broken dreams, the green that will soon sprout from our corpses into crocuses and chrysanthemums someone will plant in the garden where our final remains remain. It's always peaceful in a graveyard. So why can't the dead rest in peace? How can we ease their torment? Prophets can help, but only if you let us speak the word of God without calling us freaks that need to be locked in a padded room. There has to be room for inexplicable magic and tragic melodramatic soliloquies that cannot be labeled disease, since the world is what's mentally ill. And what we need to kill is the idea that everyone should be normal. Thanks.
That is a great piece. Yeah. Very powerful.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I'm really seeing kind of I would say a neurodivergent revolution happening around me. You know, people stepping into their sovereignty, you know, and recognizing that, you know, hey, I'm different and I can be different. You know, and I don't have to like, you know, like try to minimize myself anymore and try to like conform to, I mean, you know, we got to survive. We live in a capitalist system. And so we have to like, you know, do a lot of BSing and, you know, I mean, different people, you know, are more marginalized than others in that regard and have to do a lot of masking and, you know, and accommodating neurotypical culture. But I'm hopeful that more of us, you know, both in the queer and neurodivergent community, especially queer neurodivergence, that we're getting more power as we, you know, as we find spaces where we can be ourselves and that help us to lose our shame.
Agreed. Agreed. Well, I think this was an amazing conversation on, well, it started out neurodiversity and then it took other pathways, but that's always
This. That's
um,
neurodivergence. We go all over the place.
But I hope that you guys all come back next month. I don't know what date it's going to be. It's going to be a Sunday, but I don't know what the actual date is. First Sunday in the month. And we'll be back speaking about another topic that plagues the LGBTQ community. Again, check out our anthology on OutLoud. You can get it on redorgreenbooks.com. That's red, READ, or green.com. Or you can reach out to any of the contributors for a copy as well. So I am going to stop the recording. All right, so that's stopped. The live is still going. This is just stopped for the Spotify podcast.
Yep.
So if anybody had anything else they wanted to say or any other poems they wanted to read, the floor is open.
I'm good.
I can share a word art I created this week in response to the new Tennessee law prohibiting drag, but you need to let me do share screen.
Mm-hmm. There you go.
Thank you. So there's only one publication that I'm familiar in the United States that has a Pride submission. It's Oddball Magazine. So I submitted this image in the Pride, and then we'll see what happens with that. And this is the other one, the accompanying. At the Tennessee state capitol, there's this is the Liberty Bell, which is right outside the state capitol. So I wanted to also do something with the bell not ringing. Mm-hmm. And it's called Silent Tennessee Liberty Bell. So I'm glad that I was able to respond. I was very very shocked that people in the United States would make this legislator and would vote for it. And the other thing I did was positive is I'm going to a video meeting through Zoom in the middle of March for Delaware advocacy for GLBTs, and I may start volunteering again for that, so we can hopefully prevent those type of laws in Delaware. So
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, I kind of want to go over to Tennessee and wear some makeup and my wig and just see if I can get somebody to arrest my ass for just being on the street with, I mean, what the fuck? Like, how can you outlaw public drag performances? Like basically, because the
It's
thing,
not even drag performance. It's I think they said like impersonating a man or woman. So even if you're just like a, you know, this is a old term, I don't know what the correct term is, but even if you're just like a cross dresser or someone like me who wears like men's clothes, you could be arrested.
wow. And so who gets to decide whether, because I'm totally non-binary in my shit, you know, and like, I mean, I could be on my way to a professional engagement where I'm supposed to wear face makeup to, you know, get the lighting right, you know, on my face. And so like, I'm very intrigued. Like, I don't know. I'm trying to remember how far Tennessee is from here.
it's far. What state do you live in, StarChild?
Virginia. So it's
You're in Virginia?
Yeah, so it's kind of next to me. I mean, it's next to North Carolina, but so that'd be an 8-hour trip, I guess. Like to get to Knoxville, or probably 8 hours. But anyway, I'm gonna have to run.
Okay, have a good night. Thanks for the show. Thanks for the
Yeah.
blog.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.
Thanks so much.
Bye.